Okay, so I am delighted to see there are a few people that have already posted their code and links. Awesome. Even for those who have posted early, I would still say to you, learn how to walk through code, okay, with dev tools. And I'm going to show you mine in a minute doing that exact thing. So I'm going to move over to my code. I'm going to start, I guess I already had it started, start my local server here. And then I'm going to see. Oh, I have an error. That's right. I purposely threw an error so I could show you how to find it. Okay, so I was like, for a minute, I'm like, what happened? Because there should be much more data here, right? So I'm going to right click. I'm going to hit inspect. I'm going to go to sources. And then I'm going to go to app. Now, in this case, just know that from here on out, when we do the learn together work, you should name your first HTML index and your JavaScript app.js. Okay. So let's see. And there is. If I scroll up, okay, so this is good. So and this is a little harder to see. So I think what I'm going to do is hit refresh. So this is refresh over here. And so what I see is I do have an error in my code. Okay. So I'm gonna fix the error in way of telling you about my code. So the first thing that I can see, and by the way, if you didn't see me do this, right, when you first come into DevTools, right click, inspect, depending on what you've opened up, you will see something a little different, okay? And how yours is arranged, there's different ways to arrange that. There's different ways to arrange it here. And there was somewhere else I've noticed before you can actually show it differently, but I like this view, which is having my HTML elements here, my console setting here, and then typically what you're going to do first, if you have an error in your code, this is part of why I love getting in the browser sooner rather than later. It actually shows me a really helpful message. It says uncaught reference error list is not defined, and it even shows me the line. Okay. So if I wanted to, I could just click on this app.js and it would take me right to that line, which I will do in a minute. But I want to show you, even if you don't have an error, how you would find sources. Okay. Cool. So you go over to sources, and then if depending on where you've put it, hopefully it's in the same level, and especially if you're doing the work. But check this out. If I scroll through, I can see that line 31 that it was talking about, and I can see that this line is an error. And I might go, why is that line an error? What is the problem? So what I could do here is I could, right before the error, or right before the error would probably be a better place. I'd set a breakpoint. I would refresh the screen. And then at this point, my code execution has stopped. And it is right before the line that I know is going to create the error. Okay. So what I could do, I mean, there's multiple ways to troubleshoot this code to try to figure it out. I notice I have a list here. Okay. And actually, if you look over here, you can actually see the list got created. List at this point. But I'm noticing something. Let's see if you've noticed it. But if I just step into this line, which put the breakpoint on, I'm going to see that it's going to hit this next line. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I can see, yep, that is the line that throws the error. Okay. Which, by the way, if it does this content stuff, don't worry. It's just probably more a live server trying to help you. So you can just close it. So now I'm on the line 31, and I say list equals to whatever the list was before. Well, what was the list before? Well, I can actually come down to the console and I can actually just type out. I could also look at it over here, which is great, but I can just type out list and it'll tell me list is not defined, but I see it defined here. Have you seen the error yet? So the error is actually on line 26. because here is where I actually ended up define let list equal. Well, I capitalized it. So I'm there's a couple things here. I'm making a variable, but then right here, because I'm actually saying list equal to list, it's actually defining another variable. Okay. So this list actually will be in this scope. But, I think the point more than anything is knowing how to find errors to help you troubleshoot the code so you can walk through it. So let's move over. And now I'm going to open up my app.js. I'm going to fix that, which, by the way, look at this. In that function call, again, I'll go over this in a second, the code itself. I can actually see that this list variable is a little lighter. And whenever you see that, that's just VS Code trying to tell you, hey, something happened, right? And here, oh yeah, so exactly, look, it's actually really trying to give me some good hints here. Which, by the way, what will happen is if you declare a variable without using the let, okay, like this, first JavaScript doesn't like it, and it'll do what I think is just it'll create a global variable if I remember right. So, these kind of errors, this is why having a good style guide, and notice as soon as I hit lowercase, because we're using camel case, which means your first word starts with a lowercase, your second word is one uppercase, that's the camel, right? All right, so now let's go back over here. And now I'm just going to hit this. Now at this point, it's still running my old code. And if I hit this, I still have the error, okay? Because it hasn't actually refreshed. So let's actually refresh it now. And by the way, notice what's happened here is it's still saying, hey, I'm going to stop on that, but let's go ahead and step into this line. And now the line 31 is working. Okay. And now you can see that it is actually working. And now if I go down and type list, so I could either look at that variable over here in my local scope. So it shows you that that variable is local scope to that function. Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that because it's come up a couple of times, and the quicker you get used to things, the way they work, as far as walking through your code and troubleshooting it, because there's some great error messages in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. So now I'm going to do something different because I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. I'm actually going to show you where my code basically begins to execute to the browser. So I'm actually going to set a breakpoint here. I'm going to refresh my page, and I'm going to walk you through it. So I have first a function called setup. Okay, setup data. Here's that function call. Oh wow, I'm just noticing that. I wonder who's. Oh, because I actually just gave somebody feedback, Sahej, today about spaces, and I wonder if Prettier is actually doing that. So I'll have to do a little research there. So sorry. So function call my function name. Now I'm passing in multiple things here, right? So I'm numeric values, Boolean values, and the day itself. So if I step into here, I can see that it is, and by the way, look at this. Now, because I'm passing in a lot of variables, it actually displays them this way, not necessarily the way we've seen it before this. But what's great here is what I like about this is it shows you what those values are for this particular execution, this line in your code. In other words, when we pass it to there, right? This is current time becomes 7, right? And again, if you look down here, then this first numeric value now is scoped locally to this function, and it is now current time. So the line that it's on is it's going to do a calculation. It's going to, because basically here's what I've done. I've passed all instead of doing global data, I'm passing data around and local scoping it. So I don't have any global data, and I'm asking if drive time, I'm doing a calculation, right? And then what I do here is I just set up a variable data. So these are my variable datas, and I set them up as a string so that I could just pass them to format output. And let's see what I do there. So I just call a function and the thing with functions is you want to try to reuse. So you look at your code and you see where there's things that you've written that you could have just put in a function and call many times. And that's what I did here is I still have the show on page, but I also have this little function passing in the text and the heading that I want to do. Okay. Now, show on page, we know what happens if I hit step into. Now it's going to run show on page, passing in this string, right? There we go. Again, we'll learn this very soon. And this is that first one. This output is based on this data, right? Which came from, so it's a function there. So we're a couple of functions deep now in this place. If you go over and look, I think the call stack will show you, yep, that we did a setup called format data called show on page. Okay. And that's where sometimes it can get a little confusing. And that's why using this interface is so helpful, in my opinion, and many people I know. So let's go ahead, go back up here. So now we're gonna step out. So as soon as we do this, it steps out, it goes back to show on page. And now, because I don't really want to look at this, I know what happens in here. I can just hit the step over and then step over and then good, step over, right? So then I'm back to here. And now I'm actually going to run a function, determine list. I'm going to pass in two variables to it. So let me do that. And what happens is I have a return value coming back. That is the list. So now I'm passing in these two variables, right? So time available and a Boolean. So a numeric value and a Boolean. Now this time, because they're on the same line, you have to scoot over a little bit to see those as well. But you can also see the variables that are here in the local scope. So I'm just going to run this. I declare message. I declare my list. I run some logic. I run a little more logic to see. Again, the number of times I run it is really testing all my different logic blocks here to make sure they run. And then now that I've determined based on my input data what my list and my message is, then I'll just return it as a string using these template strings. So there we go. We've returned it. And now that list is a string that I have set up in my functions. And now I'm going to call format data again. And this time I'm passing it two things, that string value, which was represented by list, and the things to do before Jim. So that's let's just run it to see. So this little format output has a text input and a heading input. So by doing it this way, it allows me to reuse that function again and again, which is what you're striving to do. You may not always, you may just have a function to organize code into logical blocks. Okay. Okay, now I should have jumped over this, but I didn't, so I have to look at it the first time. But now I'm going to jump over that, jump over that, jump over that, come back to here, and then I'm done with that first line. So I really, and here's the exercise I want you to do when you reply, is to actually get more experience with stepping through code and giving people who are looking, for you to give people who have written code feedback, because that is such an important part of this class. Okay, I hope this helps you out, and I'll talk to you later.